Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark, where I have been on holiday. So no videos for the past few weeks, and obviously I came back and the world has changed. There's a whole load of new announcements, new releases, new stuff going on in the wacky world of Databricks. So yeah, normal plan, end of the month, we're going to have a look back at February 2023 and see what happened in the platform release notes. Now we've got a few things going on there. So there's some fairly chunky announcements. We've got things like the new VSCode extension, which we're not going to go into. That's a whole separate video. Things like Variable Explorer, which I'm very excited about. It's a tiny thing, but it is so much needed. We've got a new runtime in the form of 12.2, and there's a sneaky little hidden extra thing, which is actually just very cool for people writing SQL. So loads of stuff going on, and we're going to have a step through all of those release notes. Now, as recently, we released our training platform, so if you're looking to learn Spark or do Spark Fundamentals, we do still have this discount code active. You want to use Spark Fans to get 10% off, and I'll put a link to our training platform down below. And then for anyone who's new around here, just don't forget to like and subscribe. That's it. Cool. Let's have a look at what is going on in the world. So, as always, I'm at the Azure flavor of the release notes. Again, just use the relevant one for your cloud provider. I'm going to dive into February 23, which you won't find in the list because they haven't updated this little list over here since November for some reason. But cool. February 2023, and as always, we'll whip down to the bottom and then scroll up as things got released. Now, number one, the most exciting thing I saw just as I left before holiday, the Variable Explorer is now in Databricks notebooks. So we can hop over here. We can say, okay, I've got a little notebook set up. I've got a little string. I've got my various different strings, and I'll be going, well, what did I put in string one again? What was SDR? And I have to go walk around printing things, and it's all very painful. And that's what this sneaky little new button over here is. This Variable Explorer. Click on that, you get a list of actually what's going on with all your different variables. So you're going to hit hello. You can see, different things. I can actually see what's going on in my variables. I can do this and have a data frame just adds a variable, and I can see over here, it's of type data frame. I can see the columns that are listed in there. I can go and explore it. So I don't have to scroll up and down to find when I actually last defined it and have a look at what the schema was. I can be way down, doing something in the bottom of my notebook and go, what was that data frame? And just have a peek in my Variable Explorer to see what that looks like. And if you want to check it, little button, say, just go and display it. Show what's inside of it. That's it. That's all Variable Explorer is. Now, I mean, it should have been in years ago. It's the kind of thing that why people argue about doing browser-based development. They're like, no, I need an IDE. I want to have a development environment. And because you get things like Variable Explorers that show you what is actually instantiated in local memory, given this is running on a driver, we have the driver's local memory to tell us what's going on in our session. Makes so much sense. So yeah, we now have Variable Explorer built into Databricks notebooks. If you're having to play around, it's crazy useful. Okay. Kicking things off with my favorite thing that's going on. Okay, custom managed keys. So it's one of the security things where things are generally encrypted if they're held in the workspace, or if you're storing data, you're doing all that kind of stuff. And they've had different settings, so some things have been in preview. So now you can use custom managed keys for encryption for any of the types. So that is the workbooks that are held in a control space, for data that you're storing in DBFS, for various places that you're storing things. If you're using custom managed keys, that is now GA. So go ahead and use it. We've been seeing lots of these releases recently. So Terraform Provider is racking up. There's a few more changes going in there. And again, this is to do with Databricks node selector, so you can kind of just change how things are actually working inside of your cluster settings. It's always just keeping step. As new settings are released inside cluster configurations or Databricks proper, we're seeing the Terraform Provider very quickly stepping up to give us the ability to control that. We have two public preview announcements, which is really confusing for me at first, because we've done videos about serverless SQL warehouses and serverless real-time inference, and then I looked at this and I saw them going public preview, and I was like, were they private preview before? Was I not meant to put a video out to the world about it? But it is a change from being gated public preview to them being fully open public preview. So if you are using one of the available regions, so West US, Central US, East US, East US 2, North Europe, and West Europe, then you can use it without having to go to Databricks and say, please can I try serverless, please? Please, let me on it. So that is now actually out and public preview. So still not GA. So still, maybe don't use it for production workloads. Don't expect it to have the same support SLAs that you would get from production grade features. But you can try it out without having to get on a wait list and give reasons why you need it and all of that stuff. So serverless SQL is great. We've been having to play with it. We've been seeing some really interesting stuff. Again, it is still in preview. So take it with a pinch of salt if you're having a play and trying to get it working properly. If it doesn't come on within 8-9 seconds, have a bit of a check. Speak to Databricks, see what's going on. And then, yeah, all very cool. And another huge announcement was the Databricks extension for VSCode. So now this is actually building on what used to be Databricks Connect. And it's kind of just essentially building on more and more features to it. So there's now a public preview, so you can go and have a play with a VSCode extension to allow the loads of development locally. So very, very cool. Lots of stuff going on in there. More than we've got time to go with today. So we'll do a separate video again about the VSCode extension, digging into how that works, how you get started with it, what the gotchas are, what you can do with it, what you can't do with it. So that's going to be a separate video digging into it. But if you have been waiting for a local IDE to be doing some Databricks notebook dev, then the new Databricks extension is worth having a look at. That is now in public preview, so go and have a look. Okay. Managed identities to access storage in Unity Catalog. So previously we could have system assigned managed identities, or you could have service principals, but you couldn't have user assigned managed identities. So you can now go and do that. So that's kind of just giving you some more options about how you configure external storage location for Unity Catalog, which is cool. Got the new runtime. We'll come on to that. We'll have a look at the new runtime. It's got a couple of basic things in, and then one really good thing that it's sad that I'm so excited about it, but it is what it is. Global init scripts and cluster named init scripts changed a little while ago. So if you had set up a global init script using the old way of doing things, there's now a new way of doing things. So it's worth actually having a look at how they actually work. To make sure you are actually using the most recent one, because again, it's going to be deprecated at some point. So, oh no, they cannot be used in new workspaces. Oh, so that means if you're going to try and redeploy a workspace that was using it, you wouldn't be able to currently. So if you're using the old way of doing init scripts and cluster named init scripts, go and have a look at that and get those up to date. Again, another Terraform update, this time to do with the Databricks share, which I assume is around Delta sharing. I've not actually looked to see what that is, but and then two interesting things with Databricks jobs. So Databricks jobs being our task orchestrator, our scheduler within Databricks, and they've got two new ways we can work. Firstly, triggering a job when a new file arrives. So you'd be able to do this in things like Azure. You'd be able to do this in various different ways. You could have something like an Azure function with a blob file trigger kicking off the jobs API. Or you could have a data factory, which has its blob file trigger spinning up and kicking off a Databricks notebook with some parameters. But now you can do it directly within a Databricks job. So you can now just inside your particular job say, kick off when a new file arrives. Which is just, again, keeps things efficient. Rather than, kind of a lot of the things that we currently build, we're saying go and look every hour, use autoloader. This hour, see if any files landed in the last hour. If so, go and do things. But that means I need to turn my cluster on. That means I need to have a Spark cluster using autoloader and then saying, yeah, you've got no files, and then turn it off. And yeah, it's not going to cost a huge amount of money if I've got a small cluster doing that kickoff, but again, it does rack up costs. Whereas now, if I can have this, there's no cost in terms of Spark for doing this check. So I can have a Databricks job regularly going, any new files? Nah. Any new files? No. Any new files? Yes. Now kick off a job, now start my Spark cluster, and it's just a little bit more efficient and fast. Now, one of the things that we always saw with the Azure side of file-based triggers is if the entire blob store has more than 10,000 files in there, it switches directory listing to a log-based directory listing from a full physical directory listing. And that means it can occasionally skip files. It doesn't necessarily get everything all at once. And because of that, they've turned it off. So you cannot use this monitoring if you've got more than 10,000 files in your storage. Now, that's not a massive limitation. That just changed the patterns that we use. Once I've ingested a file, once I've finished processing it, I probably need to pick that file up and go put it into an archive. So I'm only dealing with files I've not really read, or only dealing with files in the last 7 days, 30 days, whatever kind of good retention period keeps you well under that 10,000 limit, then absolutely you can use this. So you can have various different things, looking at various different source files, and then only triggering the job, only turning on the job cluster when there is a new file to go and process. So super interesting. I've not had to play around with it yet, but again, it's a pattern that a lot of people have been asking about, a lot of people are looking at. We've been building ways of trying to get it to work that way for an age. So really, really nice to see that we've got that as an option. The other thing that we've got is these continuous jobs. So, which is kind of an interesting thing. If we're saying I'm going to do streaming, I'm going to kick off a streaming job, I now want that to be continuous. The old recommendation for that used to be, well, it's just a normal job, but it's got infinite retries. Just, if it breaks, start again. If it breaks, start again. And that was like the whole, production grade. This is how you set up a streaming using Databricks. So they've now got this new idea saying there should always be an active run of this job. So it doesn't have the idea of retry policies. You can't have multiple dependencies. You can't have any of that. It's just saying, please, Databricks, make sure this is always running. Make sure there's only ever one instance of it always running. And if it ever stops for any reason, just start it up again. So it's a new type. There's a few things in here with, if it has to fail and restart more than 5 times in a 24-hour period, it stops. Like, do you want it to? Does it tell anyone? How does that work? But I've not gone through the details yet. But certainly this is going to challenge some of the just assumed ways of working with streaming when we're saying, we always stream, this is how we stream, it runs like this. So yeah, definitely interesting. Definitely an interesting thing to dig into, to look at, to say, well, now what's the best practice way of setting up streaming jobs now that we've got continuous jobs? And what do we do with failures? What do we do with passing in the parameters of what retry it was on, which is what we used to do? Do we still have any of that context with continuous jobs? So yeah, interesting stuff. Notebook cell outputs have gone up again because people keep going, no, I want more. Give me more rows. And now it's going to be 10,000 rows or 2 meg of data, whichever is less. So whenever you're saying just select star, give me all the data, it's going to show you a little bit more data than it used to. It used to be 1,000 rows. It'll show you more. Then is a fairly big one, in that you now have Apache Ray available on Azure Databricks, on general Databricks, which is interesting. Now, I am not an expert at all in Ray, but essentially Ray is, in some ways, it's been seen as almost a competitor to Spark. Not quite the same, they have different angles. It is a distributed Python processor. It's a framework for running loads and loads of Python jobs in parallel, with a slightly different slant to how Spark does things. So every time we talk about Spark, we say, right, okay, Spark, process that table of data, and it breaks it up across loads of different workers, and it says, right, that worker is going to do the same process on that chunk of the table. This worker is going to do that on that chunk of the table. This worker is going to do it on that chunk of the table. And from what I understand, that's not what Ray is trying to do. Ray is trying to do, right, I've got so many thousand executions of that function and that function. That worker could do those bits of it. That worker can do those bits. But we're not doing the same function. We're not doing the same bit of work across different chunks of data. It's actually allowing us to take loads of concurrent executions of functions and spread it out across different workers. So it's more of a distributed parallel task runner than a distributed data processor, at least in terms of when they first started. Now, I understand Ray has things like Panda support. It can have data sets. You can do distributed processing via it. A little bit less mature as an engine in terms of all the abstractions and things that SQL has. But because of that, I guess, lineage, because of that kind of background behind Ray, you see it used for lots of machine learning. So it's used going, right, I need to do hyperparameter tuning. I need to execute all these different things at once to work out what things are. And loads, like I've got lots and lots of small executions of stuff, very compute intensive workloads that are not necessarily evenly balanced in how it should be distributed. Great for things like Ray. You can do it in Spark, but it's always been a little bit not necessarily the right tool for it, but you can do it because it's always also good for a load of other stuff. So really interesting that is now something we can do directly on Databricks. So essentially there's some things inside there where you can say, well, okay, now define a Ray cluster on top of my Spark cluster. And the driver will sit on your Spark driver, and you can use a number of the workers within your Spark cluster as Ray nodes, and then throw work at it and kind of parallelize, but it doesn't necessarily use all of your Spark cluster. So there's so much there in terms of what's the right pattern. How do you decide how much of it to use? Is it going to be standard practice to always just say, well, I'm going to have a 10 node Spark cluster, so I'll have a 10 node distributed Ray cluster sat on top of it? Or are there many scenarios where you'd break it up and you'd distribute between? I have no idea. So much we can dig into there and have a look. But just in a nutshell, it helps for lots of compute intensive machine learning workflows, loads and loads of kind of Python compatibility type things. If they are not things that are Spark native and you need it to parallelize and run across multiple clusters, Ray is a thing that can actually do that. It's better at taking just any Python and spreading it out than Spark is. Spark will tend to go, well, I'm trying to run that on one thing. So yeah, really interesting. Loads of stuff that we can do there. So tons of information. There's all the information to get started with a public preview, to go and have a play with it and start working with it. Information about how to set the cluster up. There's also, do I have it somewhere? There's an announcement blog talking about why they've done this and what it is and what you can get from it. And I'll put a link to that down below so you can kind of see what's behind things. But yeah, just a small couple of announcements this month. I go away for, just over a week and all this happens. Madness. Another one, final thing, is there's now support for a big old beefy GPU cluster within Databricks. So if you're doing absolutely huge deep learning workloads, trying to process massive things, and you need it to be GPU enabled, then you need those, fairly beefy machines in the Azure workload. That's now enabled. You can now do that within your clusters. Oh, so yeah, there's a few things just on the platform release notes. So now if we take that Databricks runtime, we saw Databricks runtime 12.2, and it's a funny one, because I don't know if this is a refresh thing, because if we're looking on the Azure release notes, Databricks runtime 12.2 is still in beta. If we're over on the Databricks release notes on AWS, it's actually no longer in beta, and it's been marked as LTS. So now I don't know if this is just they're in the middle and they're not actually awake yet, and we're going to see a little refresh soon. But yeah, and I noticed an important difference in here, and we'll have a look at that in a second. So yes, I'm assuming 12.2 is also going to be a long-term support in Azure. So people who can only work on LTS, which I know lots of very large enterprise people, they insist on it being a long-term support rather than the rolling 6 months at most Databricks runtimes. Great that we've got one already in Databricks 12. So what can we do? So Databricks Schema Evolution now supports specifying the source columns. What does that mean? So when we have automated schema evolution, so if we had some source data coming in, and I was like, right, merge that source data into my destination delta table, I could use these two. I could use insert star or update set star. Essentially just take everything that's coming in and apply it to my destination. And if I've turned on auto schema evolve, then if my insert has extra columns, it's going to treat that as a schema merge in my delta table, and I'm going to see those extra columns be appended. But that meant I had to say insert or update everything. I couldn't say only update these columns, and if there's any extra columns, also append them. If there was columns I did not want updated as a part of this merge statement, I could not do that and still have schema evolution work. And that's essentially what this is changing now. So this is saying, well, actually, I can say, hey, apply this set of columns from my source table, whether it exists in my destination or not, and it will evolve if those are new columns that are mentioned, but it means I don't have to do a blanket update everything. So very cool. Interesting to try and actually fix that and make it work better. Some extra SQL bits when we're dealing with arrays. So you've got array compact. So if you had an array kind of data type and it had nulls in there, and you want to get rid of those nulls, you can use array compact, pass an array into it, and it'll just strip nulls out. Pass an array in, and it gives you the same thing. It'll return the same thing, but it'll no longer have nulls. Nice, easy. Just super useful for working with that kind of thing. Now I also got array append. Take this thing, add it to my existing array. Really simple. Was previously slightly awkward to do in SQL, but yeah, no, great. Nice little bit of functionality. We have some SQL state error messages. So one of the common complaints in terms of the maturity of Databricks SQL compared, or Spark SQL, compared to T-SQL, PL SQL, other SQL languages, you didn't really necessarily get a nice SQL error back. And if you've got people who are very used to building a stored proc and having try catches and looking for certain SQL error messages, you couldn't really work that kind of way given how Spark SQL works. So now we've got this idea of SQL state codes. So actually that's now going to be very, very consistent in terms of it's going to bring back a SQL state identifier and then an actual listing that actually causes that. So if you're trying to do loads of testing, if you're trying to do a very robust SQL script that has lots of testing and try catches and things controlling it, you've now got this much more formal error code returning, so you can build into your error workflows and your error handling inside of your SQL. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Now that gets to the end of what is currently listed on the Azure 12.2 thing. And it just so happened that I looked at the AWS one first. I was looking through this going, yeah, okay, this all sounds fine. They've got an additional thing for query federation, which is interesting. Is that coming to Azure? Not sure. I assume so. But essentially, if you're doing query federation, it allows you to actually have some proper information, have some ports, and more control over it. But that's not the interesting stuff. The interesting thing is right down here. Behavior changes. A little flippant remark saying Databricks now supports implicit lateral column aliasing. So you can write a select statement, alias a column, refer to that alias of the column in the next, in the later part of the select clause. I can have a case statement that does a load of stuff, name it something, and then refer to the result of that case statement within my select. I was like, that's hugely useful for people doing any kind of analytics. It's the kind of thing that we always ended up writing horrible subqueries just so we can alias things, because I was about to refer to that column 10 times, and I don't want to have to copy and paste the entire expression 10 times to use it 10 times. And we used to have to do that. So having a play around, so if I do select star from, I've got some data here somewhere, VentureWorks, star, right. Do that, make sure I can actually do this. Can be lazy, I'm gonna go format my SQL for me. Okay, so if I wanted to say select name as product name, fairly straightforward, that's all normal. But if I want to say select, if I want to do the first character of product name. So here I'm, rather than referring to name, I'm referring to the alias. And I can. And that works. And I was like, you could do that in T-SQL though, right? Obviously you could do that in T-SQL. And honestly, I do so little development in pure T-SQL compared to Databricks these days, I had to go and check. And no, you can't. That same query does not work. You cannot do implicit lateral column aliasing in T-SQL. Now, I know a few other things have. I think Amazon Redshift had it in years ago. So it's not a new invention in the world of SQL, but it's actually pretty nifty. Not that many SQL environments have it as a thing, which is crazy useful. However, could they not have just finished their job? Come on, I've got my implicit lateral rename within my select statement. Can I have it in my... No, I can't have it in my where statement or group by or elsewhere in that same select in clause. So as a first step, absolutely great. If I wanted to have some mad case when, let's call this something, this is going to be my initial. That product name wouldn't have been A anyway, but you know what I mean. If I made that as my initial, or my initial equals A, that's just my is A flag. Yeah. Using that all over the place. If I wanted to use that is A flag just all over the things in my different query, I would used to have to do that as a subquery. It's so much more useful that I don't have to. But I'd love to be able to just go, whoops, is A flag as a true false binary Boolean and have that in there. But I cannot yet. Message to Databricks, if you would please actually also consider doing that in the where statement. That would be lovely. It would make me very happy. But yeah, otherwise, pretty darn cool. So it is in the release notes for 12.2 on the AWS side. It is not in the release notes, not mentioned in the release notes on the 12.2 beta on the Azure side. I'm sure that's just a refresh, and there's going to be a page update soon, and we'll suddenly see the same information over there. But it's a sneaky, nice little feature, right? Sneaky, nice little thing that if you've been writing a ton of very gnarly, complex select statements, if you're using a lakehouse proper, and you're building a gold layer, or curator layer, whatever you call it, and you've got loads of logic to build a fact, to build a dimension, to do a load of data processing, to work out your results, there's a very high likelihood that you might want to reuse a column and reuse some logic inside a column more than once, and that you probably had to wrap it inside a subquery, which does not always create the best execution plan. Don't need to anymore. Super, super, super useful. Little hidden away extra bonus feature for everybody. Cool. So yeah, that's all I had to go with. You know, just a few little things like a new distributed parallel processing framework, video code extensions, brand new SQL functions that we can use, and a variable explorer to make life so much easier. Yeah, I have to say February was a fairly busy month. So thanks, as always, for watching. I'll put the link to those blog posts down below so you can go and have a look at the release notes yourself. I always say, go and have a look yourself. Have a look at the library additions, because, again, loads of library dependencies have changed. It's always good to keep an eye on that if you're using lots of external libraries. And, yeah, if you fancy some Spark fundamentals training, do check out the training with that Spark fans discount code. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll catch you with one of the many videos I now need to make around this whole raft of new features. Catch you next time.